just to find out a mistake was made and that the winning team was not even meant to be in your class. Imagine a team winning a state title, but that team was actually made of 3 separate schools despite the rules. Imagine coaches being told a 1A class is not necessary when the 2A class is 5 times as big as any of the other classes. Sounds pretty unfair, right? Well, these are just a few of the things the OSSAA has let happen in the last few years. Of course, there's been apologetic statements, but that's about it. Those 3 teams, they're still together. That giant 2A class still hasn't been separated. I believe there has been many problems throughout the years, and there should be a bigger course of action to help prevent these problems. By making changes in the OSSAA, high school sports will be much more fair across Oklahoma. And as a high school student that runs through the OSSAA, I've had plenty of firsthand experience and have witnessed some of these unfair and unreasonable situations. My first point will be that I will be talking about is private schools. The second will be about co-ops, and the final will be about how they do not listen to their coaches. It may be better for everyone involved if private schools have their own association and governing body for their activities. Unlike public schools, private schools do not have set school districts that determine where students are allowed to live in order to attend a particular school. Private schools are allowed to offer scholarships to students based on financial need at their own discretion. There are situations I have heard of where outstanding athletes have been awarded significant tuition reduction in order to make it possible for them to attend a private school. It seems like situations like this could be argued as recruitment. Public schools have very hard lines drawn determining where students must live in order to attend a particular school. I know a high school coach at a small school who coaches multiple sports, and when I ask him about his experiences dealing with private school athletes, he says, private schools who seek to join the OSSAA should have to follow the same rules as public schools. If the OSSAA would enforce the same rules equally, I wouldn't mind competing against them. However, they do not have the same rules, especially when it comes to recruiting student athletes. So as it stands, I prefer them to be separated from public schools until the rules are enforced equally. Historically, there have been many situations where private schools have actually sued the OSSAA in order to get rules changed, in order to suit their purposes. A private school sued the OSSAA in 1998 in order for a private school to even be admitted to join the OSSAA and be eligible for students to compete in public school events. Other suits have included changing the rules regarding private school athletic performances and class assignment. The existing rule stated that if a private school performed well in an event and finished in the top 8 for 2 out of the 3 years in a row, they would move up in a classification regardless of their average daily attendance. There was a suit that ultimately ended up changing the rule, and it ended up capping the classification and did not require a private school to move up into the largest classification, even if the performance exceeded the time frame. Private schools being a part of the OSSAA is just one of the few reasons to show us why they're not listening to their coaches. Many small schools find themselves in situations where they may not have enough students for a team for some particular sports. For example, my own school hasn't had enough participants in several years in order to make a whole team for our boys cross-country team. The boys who do want to run enter races and compete as individuals through the school, but aren't able to score as a team because they don't have the minimum number of athletes. Some schools who find themselves in a similar situation choose to make a request to the OSSAA to be able to co-op with another school. The school's combined average daily attendance must still fall within the limits of the school classification, but we have seen several examples where this ability to co-op has been abused. For example, a team may request to co-op with another school but for one sport, but choose to compete in other sports individually. We have also seen some of the same schools co-op with neighboring schools one year and then compete with completely different schools much farther away than the original school the next year. This school hopping has the feel that they may be cherry picking certain athletes for specific sports, but then choosing to compete against the very same school in other sports. Last year during the state track meet, a situation of this nature was brought to the attention of the OSSAA board, and it was stated that if they had realized this before, they wouldn't have been allowed to do that. I'm not sure how this went unnoticed, but it took me 10 minutes on their website to figure out what was going on. However, since it was already underway it was too late to do anything about, and it worked out for them and they won the state meet. The coach I have discussed this with said co-op should be a last resort and only for those teams that can't make a team in any other way. I think co-op should only be granted in those special circumstances and only with neighboring districts. Schools should not have a say in who they want to co-op with, but should submit a request to the OSSAA requesting a co-op, and then they should match them with the nearest school district. I also believe that teams that co-op should be like private schools, and after so much success, should move up to a higher class. With that said, I understand why schools take advantage of the OSSAA and their inconsistency with this policy. This subject is a big one lots of people have problems with throughout the years, but even still, nobody seems to want to do anything about it. As I mentioned earlier about co-oping, there have been situations where issues have been brought to the attention of the OSSAA, and they have not intervened or taken any steps to correct injustices that have been allowed in the past. Additionally, many requests have been brought before the OSSAA to separate two of the combined classes for one particular sport. For small school cross-country competitions, Class A schools have to compete for cross-country. Class A schools have to compete with Class 2A at their regional and state meets, while those same schools get to compete with their own classes for track and field regional and state meets. Why combine the two for just one sport? The OSSAA claims that there wouldn't be enough competitors to split this out. However, when I have personally participated in these meets, there are more than 200 girls lined up to run the Class 1A, 2A cross country, and only 110 girls competing in the 6A state meet last year. Seems like it would be pretty easy to split up to me. I don't pretend to know the behind the scenes and historical detail that have gone into making the decisions that the OSA leaders have made, but I have felt the brunt of their decisions over my 4 years of competing in some of these sports, and definitely think there is room for improvement. When coaches who have dealt with this for many years don't feel like their requests are being heard and the issues continue, I can understand why some of the coaches may be frustrated. A coach told me, the OSSAA isn't my favorite entity. It seems to me through my limited interaction with them that they don't listen to their coaches. For example, the Cross Country Advisory Board voted 2 years ago to make a cross country Class A, yet the OSSAA will argue that one is not needed, even though every coach I have talked to agrees it is. So while the idea of the OSSAA is a noble one, the actions of the OSSAA are not. So as a small school coach, I do not feel the OSSAA does their job for my student athletes. These have been just a few reasons to why the OSSAA should make some changes. I've talked about private schools, co-oping, and their ability to work well with their coaches. By doing some of these changes, high school sports will be much more fair and overall enjoyable experience. I understand why this is not the end of the world. It is something that should still be addressed. It's the sheer principle that they keep letting certain things happen and giving teams and coaches the upper hand when it is not always deserved. While I hope these problems will be addressed in the next few years, unfortunately I don't think the OSSAA has any intention of making any improvements. Thank you.